Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started in just a couple minutes as everybody trickles in. So I see we are at the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. We are recording, so no worries. If you're joining at any point, you should be able to catch up on anything you've missed by visiting the recording once it is posted. Today, we are tackling another session in our EI, STEM Meets EI series. And today we're really focusing on, as an EI provider in the room, what does STEM have to do with your work with young children? I want to just start out by introducing you again to a little bit more about our project. So, my name is Tana Neufeld, and I am a speech therapist by training. Prior to joining the STEMI team, I was practicing in early intervention settings, both in the home and also in daycares or childcare facilities. And I get to bring a lot of that clinical experience to my work at STEMI. And specifically, what's really exciting about this series is I get to bring it very focused into a series like this. So I'm hopeful some of my hands-on experience will resonate with you all today. Um, I also have other members on my team that are joining us today and some who are not present. We have Shawin and Pip Campbell, Dr. Pip Campbell and Dr. Shawin Yang that are part of the STEMI EI webinar team. We also have a very big team of researchers and staff that support us behind the scenes, and you can learn all about our team if you visit the STEMI website. One quick reminder about housekeeping, just for those who are joining us for the first time in the series. I welcome you as a presenter if you're able. I'm not sure what our settings are set to, but if you're able to turn your microphone on or raise your hand for a question, I'm happy to do it that way. If you're not, we will be monitoring the chat throughout the session today. Dr. Campbell is going to help me monitor the chat, and there's also going to be some participation activities that'll take place through polls and through the chat. Shawin is your go-to person today for any technical issues. So if you're having a hard time hearing, you have questions about accessing the recording later and that sort of thing, you can certainly message Shawin in the chat window. And then we are recording, as I said, and we will make those recordings available about a week after today's live presentation. We do have all of the recordings for the prior presentations already posted on our STEMI website. Which is linked here through the QR code and also available to you through our handouts and our advertising materials. We will offer CEUs for everybody who attended live, and there will be a survey and some information to connect with CEUs following the culmination of the series. So I want to back up a little bit and maybe take a moment here to just do a quick recap of what we've learned so far in our STEM Meets EI series. In session one with Shawin, we talked about STEM around the house. And really the focus was to introduce you all to ways that STEM learning opportunities can really be embedded readily within everyday routines and play activities with children and families. Then we had two sessions with Pip that really helped us understand a little bit more about how to identify children's thinking, especially in really young children of all abilities. We walked through some ways to recognize different levels of thinking across those infant and toddler stages, and also gained a couple skills to add to our already likely very informed toolbox as EI providers in terms of observing children to really look at how they may be showing us what they're thinking so that we can figure out as partners how we can scaffold that thinking and then how we can coach families to help them add to their skills to scaffold that thinking. So we're going to pick up today with session 4 with just that. We're really honing in here on this idea that we as EI providers are very well within the realm of being able to support early thinking skills that really set kids up for success. And I thought this tired baby was a really appropriate graphic for this webinar. It probably doesn't seem like it straight out of the gate, but I really know I can resonate with what many of you are probably feeling as EI providers. Your backpacks are always full of bricks, right? There's always one more thing you've got to learn, one more thing you have to do. I believe that we really ask you to be everything to your families and your kids, and to really have a transdisciplinary hat on at all times. And so I want to just validate that. I recognize that and reassure you that the hope in this series and specifically in this session is not to add another brick to your backpack and to really add to your fatigue, but hopefully to help you understand a little bit more about why STEM is important in our EI setting, and also how you can just make some minor adjustments to what you're already doing to maximize those opportunities for the young ones that you're serving. So with that, our big idea today is really going to be to explore how those early STEM learning opportunities can support developmental outcomes, which is our business as EI providers, and really, in that, also reflect that family centered value that we know is so crucial to the work we do as EI providers. And in so doing, promoting equity in early learning experiences that we know will really trickle down, hopefully, into the opportunities and outcomes that our young ones experience into the preschool years and beyond in their school experience. I hope we can tackle this big idea by really focusing on a few objectives. We're going to spend just a very little part of our time tackling these first two objectives that are more about that why. Why do I care about STEM as an EI provider? And then we're going to spend most of our session today tackling that how to. And we're going to start with a little bit of the how to, and then finish it up in our next session. And then I'll touch on that a little bit more as we move through the slides together. So now I want to turn it over just briefly to you all. We've got a poll that Shuan will help me launch here to really get a sense of what types of providers and EI stakeholders we have in the room with us today, and what history with the series you're bringing into today. So this first poll is, what is your role? I see we've got a lot of SLPs in the room, some OT, a little bit of PT, educators, so grateful for you. And then some who are in other roles. We'll give you another minute or another few seconds rather to respond, and then we'll go and show those results at the end of this two-part poll. All right, so it looks like we've got mostly SLPs with a close second. We're going to have some OTs in the room, and then a lot of others. So I'm really curious, if you have a moment and you're near a keyboard, could you share what your other role is? I'm so sorry I wasn't able to capture everybody's role on this poll, but I really want to know what that role is. OTs, yeah, service coordinators. Oh, love my service coordinators. You guys are such an essential piece of this machine, right? Getting everything going. Family counseling, so cool. What other roles are we representing here? Oh, a caregiver, very nice. Lead agency professional development, a trainer, training coordinator. Wow, such variety today. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. If at any point in time you'd like to briefly discuss how some of the ideas in this presentation might relate a little more to your roles, please don't hesitate to ask questions. We'll have some time at the end for questions. If my presentation timing allows, I'm hopeful it will. All right, so we have one more piece to that poll. Shuwen, would you mind launching the second piece?
Yeah, they are in the people answer that question
Wait, it's
already.
behind my
So
chat
if you scroll
window.
down,
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. I don't see. Oh, there it is. It's underneath. So it looks like most of you have been here to this series before. Great. So not going to spend a lot of time revisiting concepts that were early in the series. But if you are new to the series and you have a question that really needs to be answered to help you understand where we're going today, do not hesitate to ask in the moment. We'll monitor the chat as closely as we can. And then, as I said, I'm really encouraging anyone who hasn't seen the other sessions in our series to go ahead and look at those recordings. They're not necessarily meant to be taken in sequence. They can be for sure, but I think you'll find them helpful regardless of where you are in your viewing. All right, so with that, I want to move to kind of setting the stage for us here by sharing a little bit of a vignette. This is a vignette, of course, is not going to be a real child, but this is kind of a culmination of some of my experiences I've had in practice over the years. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Josh, who is a lover of baths. I wonder if anybody else in the room has children on their caseload who are a lover of baths. I know it tends to be kind of like tomatoes, mushrooms, or olives, right? It's like you either love your bath or you hate your bath. There's very few kids that are in between. And so Josh is going to be our little guy who is a lover of baths. And I hope as we walk through this brief vignette, what you'll really see is some of the principles we're going to discuss together coming to the surface. So first, let's talk about Josh as this 2-year-old cutie who receives early intervention services. And his targets really are just delayed expressive language and some mild motor delays. During a recent home visit, Josh's therapist joins him and his mom for bath time. Josh is very interested in scooping and pouring water between different cups, watching it closely as the bubbles rise and overflow. He also likes to repeatedly dunk his toy yellow duck under the water and then let it go, and he giggles as his toy duck bobs back and forth to the surface. As she observes, Josh's mom says with a chuckle, he could scoop and splash all day if I let him. I'm not sure what he's learning, but he's definitely into it. Instead of redirecting Josh, his therapist leans in. She starts to ask questions like, which cup holds more water? And she introduces some new words, simple words like full and empty and sink and float. She models slow and gradual pouring and compares the size of the bubbles as they pop up on the surface. With some encouragement from his therapist, Josh's mom joins in, adding some sponges and plastic containers to the mix. She talks about what she is doing while she is doing it. And she highlights some of these new words around these new materials. What Josh's mom doesn't realize is that her language is closely tied to STEM vocabulary, and that her rich description is really helping Josh to make meaning from this experience and to gain some scientific thinking skills. So, in essence, um, oh, sorry, I'm going a little fast. By the end of the session, Josh begins to learn and explore some of these new actions in words, and he even initiates some of them. He uses some simple phrases as he plays, and he adds to his own spin to the mix, really filling up those nearby cups with water and then watching to see if they will float or sink. So, in a sense, this wasn't a science lesson, right? It wasn't a structured science lesson. It was just a bath. But within that bath, there were some STEM learning opportunities that were created specifically because the adults in Josh's experience were intentional about the ways in which they scaffolded that interaction. I think it's really important to notice in this vignette that the very beginning is the identification of what Josh is interested in. And his mom actually took the lead on that by helping us see how much he loved to scoop and pour and dunk that duck over and over again. And then his therapist really met mom where she was and what she understood of that experience. She also met Josh and his interests. And instead of redirecting him, perhaps to some motor skills specifically that she wanted him to work on, or some language skills that she wanted to scaffold in more of a traditional way, she really leaned in and started using some of those STEM teaching strategies that are also really close to EI strategies to provide some opportunities to really build on what Josh was saying and doing, and then to coach mom to do the same in that activity that's likely happening every day. So with that, you probably entered this session maybe wondering, what does STEM actually look like for babies and toddlers? I think Shawin and Pip have done a really nice job of laying some of the groundwork to answer that wondering. But we know in this field that some of the common myths are still persisting, and that it is common for us to encounter parents and colleagues, or even in our own mindsets, to encounter some of these preconceived notions that STEM really isn't for very young children, that it kind of belongs in that academic setting or the early childhood center setting, or maybe even that children with significant disabilities really have more important things to work on than STEM learning right now, or maybe even don't have some set of prerequisite skills that would make them good candidates for learning about STEM in the first place. And then, of course, we may think as EA providers, well, STEM really isn't my job. I'm a therapist, I'm not a teacher, and this seems like a really obvious academic concept, and I don't feel very well prepared to help these young children navigate that. So I think, what we have hopefully been able to convey so far in this series is that STEM really occurs all day long. And that it only takes a little bit of a shift of our lens to realize some of the opportunities and learning that are going on. I think in our STEM Around the House series, we really talked a lot about those opportunities that really pop up throughout the day within daily routines and plays and play activities. And I think Schumann gave some great examples. And then Pip really helped us understand in the session 2 and 3, what are some of the examples of those nuanced thinking skills, right? It might be easier to identify the motor skill, the social emotional skill, and the play skill that's happening in those daily routines. But how do I refine my observations so that I can really see the nuances of thinking that are underlying everything that the child is doing as they explore within these daily routines? So I'm hopeful that you have a sense at least that STEM is happening. STEM learning and opportunities for learning are happening in your practice. And I'm curious if you could pop over to the chat and share a little bit more about what you already see. How are you already incorporating some of these opportunities for STEM concepts and thinking skills into your session? I always feel like we need Jeopardy music for these longer pauses to give people the time they need to coordinate their thoughts and type it in the window. So talking about size, such as, for example, big and small, talking about speed, these are great examples. Not in my position, but with my grandbabies, that's an excellent example as well. Size and lots of description. Yep, excellent description. Focusing on quantitative and qualitative concepts. Yep, lots of concept vocabulary. And I imagine concept demonstration coming up in your routines and play, providing different kinds of experiences and describing what they are seeing. Love it. I love the variety and novelty in your example too. I think sometimes it can be easy to focus in on the repetitive routine piece that we know is so important to early childhood development, but forget the slight variation piece, right? The repetition with variety, which is the space in which new learning can really happen for some of our little ones, especially around STEM concepts. Heavy and light when pushing cars and trucks, that's great. Experimenting with food during feeding therapy, I love that. So many senses involved in food. quantity and numeracy concepts in food. I'm going to showcase at least one video next week that is a beautiful example of numeracy during mealtime. I really love it. Describing the world around us and bringing attention to new ideas and things like more, less, cold, hot. Yeah, I love that example as like a spontaneous example, right? It really highlights how sometimes just taking a moment to not do the thing, right? And this is an important piece, I think, for caregivers that we'll talk a little bit more about as we move through this session and next, is really recognizing the opportunity itself in the first place, right? Within the routine. So instead of just walking straight to the car, could we take another couple of minutes to use some verbal guidance, some descriptive talking, some pausing and showing, and really modeling some of that curiosity and thinking that we're hoping our children are developing. Sensory bins are definitely materials that can be a part of STEM learning. These are great ideas. And so I'm not telling you anything new in terms of activities for today's application piece, but what I'm hoping is that we'll give you just a few more strategies to add to these beautiful contexts that are already within your practice. So I'm making big assumptions here that if you're here, you're in. You think this is important. However, you are an EI provider and you can fill in your role there, right? I'm an SLP, I'm an OT, I'm a PT. I've already been asked to be a primary service delivery practitioner. I really don't know what STEM has to do with me. And I don't believe you when you tell me you're not just going to give me something else I need to learn. And so I'm hopeful that we can get there, but I'm sure many of you are thinking, okay, well, what do we do now? And what do we do now that we're committed? So I feel like the main takeaway for why I believe STEM is so critical, not just an extra, but really critical for us to be thinking about early on in development as EI providers, is that we know how much thinking or cognition inspires development across other areas. Right. So cognitive foundations, they're not required for development of other areas necessarily. There isn't really a black and white correlation or causation, rather, in the research or in our practical experience. But we do know that cognitive foundations that are stronger really lead to stronger development and, more importantly, to opportunities for stronger development in other areas, including motor skills, social emotional capacities, play complexity, and very much so communication. So I wanted to just take a minute to use an example here because I think this is a big statement and I want to make sure it's clear and that it's helpful as we think through what we're going to do with this information. If we think about motor skills, I kind of channel my physical therapy colleagues that have been so patient and collaborating with me and helping me really develop more transdisciplinary skills in my work. And, they've talked to me a lot. My one colleague in particular would always tell me, the curiosity and thinking that a child has in my PT sessions is going to drive my ability to get them to practice their motor skills. So thinking about a child she's trying to get even to use a walker, um, is she very much noticed that the kids that had those capacities and curiosities to set a goal and problem solve to achieve that goal with the support of a therapist and a parent were really the ones that were super motivated to challenge themselves physically to get that motor skill down. So I think motor skills is a great place to see some of this in action. And then I'm going to speak personally from my own experience as an SLP, and there's so many of you in the room. I hope you'll chime in if you have agreement or disagreement on this. But thinking drives language, right? Sometimes it can be difficult for us to know what our kids are thinking before they have language. And so it's this weird conundrum we find ourselves in as providers and parents. But it doesn't mean it isn't existing. And so, language really becomes the symbolism for thoughts, intentions, feelings, ideas. And so we really want to provide very early opportunities to develop thought so that when we're teaching words, these words are matching the ideas, intentions, and so forth that our kids want to express. I provided some references at the end of the presentation today that'll hopefully give anybody who's a little bit more interested in evidence around these ideas something to go to and to share. All right, so then with that in mind, let's walk briefly through a couple more specific reasons why STEM is relevant to your work. And this is the piece I'm going to move a little bit faster through, but I have some slides here for you to reference. I have some resources at the end, as I mentioned. But the first one here, really, the bottom line is that STEM is really going to enhance developmental outcomes. It's going to really help to support them, but also enhance them. And I think really the crux of support here is that engaging young children in STEM activities is really a great context. It's like a substrate, not only the activity itself, but also the way we approach it as an adult teacher or scaffolder or partner. It's really a great substrate for building all of the areas that we're tackling in the IFSP: cognitive, language, social emotional development, motor skills, um, emotion and sensory regulation, critical thinking, all of it, you name it. And so then the main takeaway for that rationale is that STEM learning is really about providing opportunities to support the very outcomes that you as EI providers are aiming for in your work every day. It's not different outcomes, the same outcomes, just a little bit of a different, flower bed of growth, so to speak. The second reason why this is relevant is that STEM learning opportunities really are reflective of the family-centered practice values that are at the center of EI. And again, I've got some details here on the slide and some references on this, but the main point is we know how important family-centered and child-centered practice is to what we do in early intervention. And we can see so much of that mirrored in the STEM learning approaches that STEMI and other similar groups are fostering in research and practical work. I think one of the things that really stands out most, and I'm recalling back to Shuen's first session, is that when we do STEM learning, we actually don't need special materials, right? And as EI providers, you all know this more than most. And Pip talked about that, or Shuen talked about that idea of bagless therapy. We really want to be able to meet families with the resources they have, in addition to the preferences, priorities, and et cetera that they have. And so I'm hopeful in some of the videos we share today and next week, you'll see some of that family-centered value coming through, and even the resources and context within which we can do these types of activities. So the main takeaway, and as I kind of highlighted in our vignette with Josh, STEM is not a program to deliver. Not in early intervention specifically, but also as we move through school age, it's not a program to deliver. It's really a lens that we hope will deepen those parent-child interactions that are already happening, and deepen them in a synonymous way, not in an extra way. My third point here of why STEM is relevant to your role is that we've recognized in research and practice how much early STEM learning opportunities support equity in the early learning space. And then how those opportunities in the early learning space, thinking about the preschool age, are really kind of rippling through the opportunities and outcomes that we see later on academically for children as they move through school age. And so, some of the main points here that I want to touch a little bit more deeply on than I did in the prior two slides is that we know that children from marginalized groups, including those with disabilities, who are often on your caseload, and many of the children you serve, I imagine, have different backgrounds that are intersecting to create perhaps some barriers to opportunity for them. But we know that these children often have fewer early experiences with STEM concepts, and this can really contribute to their achievement gaps as they go further along in their schooling. There's some interesting research I provided at the end specifically that talks a little bit more about some of the trajectories that we're noticing when children are provided quality early STEM experiences, in terms of their growth and development in literacy and numeracy skills, right? Two really big deals when it comes to getting into the school space. So in essence, the main takeaway here is making STEM accessible early really leads to better academic opportunities, and therein, hopefully to better academic outcomes as well. All right, I just want to pause here just to give you guys a breathing minute. I talk fast, and I know it can be difficult to take it all in. So, anybody have a comment or a question at this stage? Otherwise, we are going to spend the next half an hour diving into some videos and talking through some strategies. All right. So, um, as we've kind of emphasized so far, your role as an EI provider puts you in a wonderful position to be able to add some of these concepts to the opportunities that you provide kids and families. And I'm hopeful that this will seem like an add on, as I said, to what you're already doing. So you're probably going to hear some echoes of just best practice and early intervention stuff, right? You're probably going to find yourself going, well, yeah, duh, like that's what we do in early intervention. So if for any reason something doesn't stand out as being different enough, ask a question, make a comment, but also know that yes, much of this is what you are already doing. I think the main difference is really thinking about thinking and thinking about specific STEM and cross-cutting concepts, which I hope to highlight as we walk through some of the videos. And to guide us with that, this is a framework that was adapted from a prior presentation that's available on our STEMI website. I want to give you the title just in case you want to go watch it. It's one of the STEMI PD series that was called Adaptations to Everyday Routines and Activities. Make STEM Happen for Infants and Toddlers. And this was presented by Dr. Pip Campbell, who is in our room today, and also one of our other colleagues at STEMI, Dr. Christine Harradine. It's a great presentation. I think it touches on some other elements of adapting for children with different abilities that we don't talk a lot about in today's session. And so I encourage you, if this is a topic you're interested in, to slide over and take a look at that. But I think I've adapted this framework to 3 steps because I feel like it will be helpful to anchor us today. The very first step here, as you can see, is we want to approach this idea of scaffolding children's thinking by first using or creating a naturally occurring learning opportunity. And so that should speak to you loudly as, of course, daily routines, likely daily routines and play activities, as they are naturally occurring within the child's everyday life, right? I'm going to focus a little bit more on play activities today. And I'll tell you, I'm not thrilled about that, but it really was because that was the videos that I wanted to showcase in terms of thinking skills and scaffolding strategies. But I just want to emphasize that this is all possible within those everyday family routines as well. And I'll showcase a couple STEMI resources that can maybe bring a little bit of that to life for you, despite the fact that I don't have great daily routine videos to showcase for you today. But very first step, number 1, use and create that naturally occurring learning opportunity within routines and activities. Step number 2, then, of course, is we want to embed some foundational, and I bolded foundational here because our STEMI learning trajectories approach that Pip mentioned for us last session really goes from birth all the way through into, depending on the domain, into that preschool and even early elementary age. Right now, in our session, we're talking about foundational, right? We're talking about birth to 3. So whenever you're looking at STEMI resources, you really want to narrow in on those foundational resources. And you're probably wondering what they are in the particular STEM domains. And so we'll walk through a couple of the resources that we have on the website to kind of orient us to a few of the STEM domains. But I also want to remind you that Pip walked us through some ways of kind of thinking about those level of concepts and thinking in these young children. Remember the observer noticer, observer recognizer, and actor on were 3 of the main levels that she showcased in many of her videos. And so I want you to have those ideas floating around in your head as we walk through our videos together today as well. So once we've got that activity or that routine, and then we're thinking about which concepts from our STEM domains and thinking skills, cross-cutting concepts would be embedded best, we of course likely need to make a couple adaptations in order to make STEM learning opportunities salient. And those adaptations are likely going to occur across environment, materials, and instruction. And we'll talk a lot more about that here in our STEMI adaptations framework. Um, We use this framework. It's not ours. We didn't develop it, but we did adapt it from what most of you will probably recognize as universal design for learning. Um, and in a marriage of several other research projects. But I think what I love the most about thinking about adaptation in this multifaceted way is it reminds us as providers that adaptation is not just about the thing that we're holding and doing in the environment if we're practicing fine motor skill or play. And it isn't about just modifying the environment if we're practicing on gross motor skill, right? And it isn't just about modifying the way we interact to get words or sign language or something from our child who is maybe working on communication skills, but it's actually a framework of considering all three. So I'm going to give you just a couple basic ideas here as we go into watching the videos. The understanding that this adaptation framework is focused on creating opportunities, right? So you're always working on your IFSP goals, you're measuring outcomes according to those goals. The STEM lens is really about emphasizing opportunity, not performance in relation to STEM, right? We're not looking for any sort of criteria met for a STEM skill necessarily, although some of it may cross over with some of the IFSP goals that you are targeting. We also want to recognize that we always start with the child and family interests and preferences, which is not news to you as EI providers. We also want to start with strengths when we're thinking about a STEM lens. And then from that area of what is happening and what does have potential, we can adapt these areas of environment, materials, and instruction by thinking about a few things. First and foremost, we want to think about developmental level, right? And Pitt mentioned our learning trajectories approach, which really helps us kind of lay out what that looks like in terms of specifically STEM thinking and STEM concepts. But you are no stranger to developmental lenses. So you're always having, where is that child now? And how do I adapt this activity not only so that that child can meet the activity where they are, but so that I can start thinking about what materials and instruction need to be involved to scaffold that child forward in their thinking. Obviously, we also want to think about that child's needs, and this is where the term adaptation usually resonates more clearly for us as therapists, right? Assistive technology, adapting activities for kids who have motor needs, vision needs, etc. And that is a part of this lens as well. But we also want to think about adapting for the child's needs in terms of moving them through those STEM domains and thinking. And that might mean using some different instructional strategies or materials that really give the child a different opportunity to build their thinking in a particular direction. All right, so most of this info that's on the slide regarding environment, materials, and instruction can be found on a guide to adaptations, which I linked in your slides, and I'll go through at the end today. But I want to highlight a few that I think will be important to think about as we watch through videos. First off, in environment, we really want to think about the spaces, the places, and the context, right? Environment includes not only where we are, but what we're doing in that space as well. We want to make sure that we have an area or a space with the materials that facilitate a particular activity or routine. That should be a given if we're following a spontaneous routine, but if we're creating more of a planned learning opportunity, we have to think about that in advance with families. We also want to make sure that those materials, of course, are accessible to the child and also that they're within reach when that activity is happening. And thirdly, which I think is a little bit of a different way of thinking about materials, is that we want to make sure that we not only have the things that are commonly used in this activity, but maybe we're thinking about what materials need to also be present in order for us to stretch thinking here. So if you think back to Josh's vignette, when mom brought in sponges and containers, she brought in more materials that allowed for different ways of acting on those materials, which then allowed for different ways of talking, playing with the materials, and then stretching thinking from those opportunities. All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to move a little faster through materials. Obviously, materials are anything we need to do this activity together. We want to consider not only toys, but some of those everyday objects that are in the home that would be conducive to creating a thinking experience. And then, of course, any materials that are assistive technology in nature that may make it possible for a child to access a particular opportunity for learning. I think it's really important to think about what Pitt mentioned last session about how children learn. We know that kids are going to have sensory channels that are a lot more attractive to them or salient to them. And so I encourage you when you're thinking about adaptations in terms of materials, that you're also thinking about the child's learning channel, right? How are they taking in information already? And how do I provide additional materials that are either similar or actually maybe even different in very intentional ways so that that child can continue to learn through the channels that are more salient for him? And then lastly, of course, thinking about instruction, we're going to talk at length about this next session. But I wanted to give a couple examples of some of the partner strategies, the adult strategies that are part of adapting for STEM learning. And these are, of course, things that you're probably already doing in your practice and you may not even think about them as STEM concepts. These are things like modeling, right? Modeling that curiosity and thinking, things like STEM talk, talking about STEM vocabulary, asking open-ended questions, wondering out loud, what will happen if we do this? Or I wonder why that happened, right? And I think ultimately what I love most about thinking about STEM when I'm interacting with children and families is I love the emphasis on shared problem solving. So when we solve problems unilaterally for kids, we don't give them a lot of opportunity to stretch their thinking, right? So this idea of shared problem solving is really going to be emphasizing how important it is for both the partner, the adult, and the child to have some sort of role in the interaction in terms of solving the problem. And of course, that problem is going to look different depending on the child's age and the nature of the activity. So with that in mind, we don't have time to watch this whole video, but I wanted to introduce you to it because I feel like it gives a great example of some of this adaptation in action. So we'll probably watch the first 2-ish minutes, and then it is embedded and linked in your slide handout so that you can watch it in its entirety. And I do recommend you do that. It's about 5 minutes long.
The lives of young children move quickly as they develop.
I wanted to pause really quick because I forgot to mention, as you watch, love for you to like narrow in a little bit on some of what you're seeing. And so my guide would be, what do you see happening in terms of the ways that the caregiver is identifying what the children are interested in and their developmental strengths, as well as what they're not really ready for? And then what types of adaptations are made here in this video to really facilitate that scaffolding that we've been talking about?
Grow. But have you ever stopped and looked at how they are thinking? How they make meaning of the world around them? If you look closely, babies learn by making observations, forming hypotheses, testing theories, and expanding on their newly formed knowledge. This is STEM. Babies engage in STEM every day, but they don't do it alone. Although babies are born scientists, they need engaged adults to wonder alongside them and provide opportunities to explore.
You hear that sound? You are here making that sound. They do STEM every day. They question, they wonder, they give you the cues. They look up at you and almost are asking a question. And then you got to just help them to find answers. Is it moving? You're making it move. You're making it move with your fingers. They're looking for you to engage as well, and it's kind of like a back and forth reciprocal conversation you have with children when they're doing their investigation. So first we brought out the measuring cups and the spoons to add with the drums, which were familiar. Then I slowly brought down the wind chimes, and I really thought they would really be so excited about seeing them. And so I went and kind of hit them a little bit with my finger, and the children looked up at me, but then they went right back down and looked right at the drum and started to beat the drum. So that really just told me they weren't quite ready yet to engage with the chimes, and I was kind of a little bit baffled. And I said, I gotta adapt to this, and I have to change my plan.
Well, where did the music go? There was music, and now it's all gone.
I like to put the materials out, but let them lead the investigation and see what they're interested in, and then adjust from there. Follow their cues, follow their interests. I might have an idea of an activity in mind, but they are the ones that are going to lead the investigation, and their interests and what they want to investigate might be something completely different than what I had in mind.
Where is that sound coming from? It's a new sound.
Less is more. So not putting out as many materials.
I'm going to stop there for the sake of time, but what did you all notice? Maybe in the video, but also in the dialogue with the providers that's going on in terms of how they are thinking about this as a thinking investigation, right? And how they're adapting the ways in which they are setting up the environment for the babies and also talking to the babies in order to help them make meaning of that experience. I'd love to just hear what you all noticed. I love that. Yeah, baby engagement as a form of communication. So critical. We rely so much on words to try to understand what kids think and understand. So I love that she highlighted looking at their non-linguistic or pre-linguistic ways of showing us what they're thinking about. Serve and return. Yeah, new materials. Great ideas there. Allowing the child to lead, follow the child and call them investigators. Yeah, what a great way to build a STEM identity in these very young babies, right? You're a scientist, you're an investigator, using those questions to help them explore. Yeah, and demoing how to explore together, right? She said, I hit the chime with my finger. I showed them, I modeled what is it about this new material that should be interesting? Caregivers interacting with when the infants are playing with the drums, observe the child to see what they are interested in. Yeah. So that's a great video. There's some really beautiful additional examples of making adaptations. I do encourage you all to go back through and watch it if you're interested, but I want to dive into a few more kind of brainstorming videos together. I thought it would be nice to start with what you might be familiar with in the EI setting, which is the IFSP outcome that you're working for. And so here on this slide, I have done my best to create kind of a example IFSP outcome. I realize that all of you are going to write them and think about them in a very different way, depending on where you work and who you're working with in terms of families. But here we have a little boy, Aaron, and the idea in his IFSP outcome is that he's going to move from a crouching position to a standing position. To standing, and use standing and crouching skills to move between pieces of furniture or other stable surfaces, et cetera, et cetera. So he's working on gross motor skills, right, in terms of helping him access his toys and to navigate his daily routines. Hopefully this sounds kind of familiar to an outcome that you might tackle as a provider. So revisiting our framework then, I've decided to choose a play activity. I'm calling it boxcars here. So that's our user create. We've got that naturally occurring activity that Aaron is already engaged in, and he's interested in it. I have to figure out these STEM concepts, right? Like I need to embed some STEM concepts into this activity, but maybe I don't know what they are, or I don't know which ones might actually, be more conducive to this particular interaction. So I just pop a quick resource in the chat for you, just to have in the back of your toolbox as we walk through this session, for the rest of this session, and also into next week, that we actually have the STEM domains outlined on our STEMI website. There's some descriptions and examples to hopefully help you all gain a very basic background of STEM concepts, in addition to what Pip discussed last time, which is those cross-cutting concepts. I've decided today that I am going to choose the domain of forces in motion based on what Aaron was already interested in this activity. And so I've laid out some very basic properties of forces in motion, which is a physical science under the S of STEM, and also some of the levels. And you'll probably recognize on the right-hand side of this slide, some of those foundational levels that Pip walked you through in the last two sessions, right? Observer noticer, observer recognizer, actor on. And so we're looking for signs of thinking in this particular clip. And also, I'm going to scaffold you through how could we notice adaptations that are happening, but also adaptations that we could make in order for this to be an even more robust thinking opportunity. So here are some prompts on the slide for you to kind of think about as you're watching. It's a really short video. And again, Aaron is in a box, so he's got a bit of a stable surface. He has some toys in that box, and his play partner is encouraging some interaction. I would love to know what properties of forces in motion you see happening, what properties could be able to happen, thinking about gravity, thinking about pushing or exertion, force, right? Thinking about friction or collision. And then I also would love to know, what do you think this partner could do better based on what this child is interested in? What materials could be brought in? How could the environment be adapted? And how could instruction or interaction strategies be changed?
Knock, knock. Boo! Zoom.
All right, so if you pop into the chat, I first want to know, do you think that this is a fair opportunity to work on Aaron's motor goal, his IFSP goal? He's in a box, it's a stable surface, he's got a couple areas he can go to and fro. Can he practice crouching and standing and moving from point A to point B in this activity? What do you guys think? Yeah, probably. You know, like, is like the perfect activity? Maybe not. You could probably think of 25 more that are better. Works, right? So we can get that motor piece in here, and we know that that's in the back of our mind. What else do you see? What are some opportunities here that are related to thinking and STEM concepts that you've noticed happening in Aaron? Yeah, he tried to let it roll again, but it didn't go. He didn't seem to have more strategies to take it from there, right? But he did try again. What else do you see? Do you think Aaron seemed to notice that that thing was moving versus not moving? Oh, we got a long description here. When a car falls, he seems surprised. Yeah, so he did notice collision. The adult responds and engages when the car falls. The child seems to test the toy by pushing the car and putting it in the same place. We could have expanded on this by labeling what was happening. Yeah, the adult here, which is me, by the way, and it's hard to watch yourself, right? But as a mother, I thought I was spot on in this interaction. Really was not talking enough. I was way too quiet. There was a lot more description that could be happening here to talk about what was going on. Wonderful. And you guys were thinking it as well. I see you got a couple more comments in here. More strategies, other strategies, right? So, what are some of the things that I could have done with my talk to encourage thinking? Knowing the force in motion is about understanding moving objects, right? What happens if I move a different object? What happens if I move an object harder? If I put it on a ramp and let it fall? What are some of the things that we could have tried to embed here to challenge Aaron to do more? Maybe put a small table to roll the car. Use words like ready, set, go. Yep. What else? Maybe add another car to model different ways to engage with the car. Yeah, adding more materials. Talking. Uh-oh, fell down. Boom, try again. Fast, slow, right? Some of the ideas that you guys talked about in your practice. Big, little car. What happens with that, right? Um, a ramp that's up high versus a ramp that's down low. 1, 2, 3, go up, down. Yep, you got it. The flap could have been a ramp, and the sentences could have made, or excuse me, the steepness could have made the car go faster. Absolutely, yeah. Now, do we expect Aaron at his obviously young age to, start answering questions about why things are going faster or orchestrate a ramp and engineer it? Probably not. But when we make these variations, as you're suggesting, we really try to encourage Aaron to go from what I believe looks like observation, right? He's noticing right now, maybe on the cusp of recognizing, to really being more of an actor on. How can I change up what I'm doing in my play to make different things happen with this idea of forces and motion? So I want to draw your attention here to the slide I provided for you. There's lots of EI cards and investigation resources on our STEMI website that talk about all of the domains, including forces in motion, which I've showcased here on the slide. There's also EI cards that are about daily routines, as I said, and not play activities necessarily. And they don't all hit all of the STEM domains, but we've tried to incorporate the STEM domains within activities that would be the most conducive to scaffolding thinking around those domains. Let's do one more video. I know we're running up on time. I will stay after for anybody who has questions, but let's look at another outcome around play. So here we're working on constructive play. That's Aaron's IFSP outcome. We want him to use materials for constructive play. But let's watch what he does. And I want you to pay attention to what is he interested in? What STEM concepts are going on here, right? What is the partner doing? And then what could we do to enhance this opportunity for thinking?
Which one? Oh, where'd it go? Ooh, which hand is it in? My goodness, you're good at this game. Good job. Which one? Give me one. You're trying to put them together. Like so. Okay, which one is it? No, it's not in there. It's not in there. Yeah. Oh, there it is. You got it. Good job.
All right, what do you all see? What's the child's interest? What are some of the STEM concepts, especially cross-cutting concepts that are showing up in this activity, which is certainly a constructive play activity. We can build all day with these Duplos. You all know how to do that. But there's a little bit more going on here. Object permanence, connecting the blocks. He is a pretty quiet kid. Oh, we're talking about sorry, he was quiet. A peekaboo with the box. Yeah, sorry, I was catching up, Patricia. Catching up to the chat. Reinforcing engagement. Actions as communication. So again, here we see the partner responding to that evidence of thinking and communication, but there's no words being produced by that baby, of course. Dad seemed quiet. Yeah, he was pretty quiet. You know, what I love about this video is there's a lot of great wait time in here. It would be easy to fill this with a bunch of questions, right? Or encourage the child to open the hand. But Dad's quietness actually really allowed for a lot of initiation to follow this child's interest and to recognize his thinking and curiosity so that it could be scaffolded in a salient way. He was checking out new blocks. Yep. Learning to guess and think where it is. I like how Dad waits for the child to interact with his hands. Yes, absolutely. So STEM domains do you think are popping up here? We've got some cross-cutting concepts coming in, object permanence, cause effect. Maybe what are opportunities for STEM domains here? And that will be our last question before we end for today. I love that example, Zoe. Some logic's coming through here, right? He's really being challenged to solve that problem with dad. Shared problem solving of, well, if it's not in this hand, it must be in the other hand. Yeah, you're not alone, Patricia. The STEM domains are not comfortable for us as therapists. I'm hopeful that prior to the next session, if you decide to join, you can all take a little bit of a browse through that STEMmy link that I offered you in the chat and also put in our resources for you and just kind of get a little background. So, I think what I love most about blocks is there's so many opportunities to do pretty much all of our STEM domains, but a few that popped up for me is I could see this as a beautiful early numeracy activity, right? This idea of this early number system, recognizing quantities and more and less, being able to spot one versus two. And so I would encourage this caregiver to talk about quantity as it's relevant in this interaction, not in a testing way, just in a scaffolding way. We also see some beautiful opportunities to build with these blocks, to recognize patterns, right? Which is cross-cutting concept, to recognize and compare and contrast different elements of those materials, their color, their shape, their size. So lots can go on during block play. And I've included a couple references here for you that are specifically around block play activities, as well as many links at the end of our slide deck for guides that could help you walk through teaching practices you could use in your coaching, adaptations you might want to use for some of the families who are supporting children with higher needs. And then one I want to draw your attention to before next session is these action templates. So I'd encourage you to go on and explore. These could be really good plan making tools for you to figure out, okay, well, how could I start thinking about STEM concepts and embedding them in the routines that my families are already enjoying with their children? So with that, we are 1 minute over. So I'm going to stop my share. I will continue next session with many more videos, including the one I did not get to today. So please join us again. You should get, I believe, a email or a survey link after today. Shawin will pop in if I'm wrong, but I will stick around for another few minutes if anybody has questions. Yeah, Jacqueline's got an idea here. Could work on sound, knocking the block on the ground and commenting on the noises that it makes. So, Travis, go ahead.
In terms of a certificate, that after all our series has ended, you will receive an email about application to the certificate. So yeah, so just we will end the whole series in September, so you should receive some information about that. And we will have your record of attending the webinar.
Getting some thank yous. I will hang out again for another minute or so. If you've got a question, please feel free to pop it in the chat. And as I said, I will continue in 2 weeks with our next session about being a STEM caster, but we'll get to pick up a little bit more of this idea of spotting some adaptations, and also how we can speak as facilitators and partners and coaches in order to really encourage thinking, even for learners who are not really expected to speak back yet. All right, Shuan, I don't see any questions popping in. Thank you all so much. Whenever you'd like, Shuan, I'm happy to end the webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will
Thanks,
end the
everyone.
webinar. Thank you.